Welcome, everybody. Today we are joined by a professional Catholic counselor and high performance coach who has been trained by none other than Father Ripperger himself in Thomistic psychology. So this is something you're not going to want to miss. This is something I've been looking forward to. But Kone, welcome for coming on, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is great too because Keone is somebody who I actually know in person. I was at his house last week and we were watching some basketball. So I'm not
Yep.
just a face on a screen to this guy. We know
Yeah.
each other in person, which is really cool.
Yeah. It makes it better.
That's right. That's right. But Keone, I've got a lot of questions for you. I've got a lot of things I want to know personally. You've been trained by the man, the myth, the legend, Father Ripperger. So I'm sure you've got all kinds of things you can help me out with. But could you just define for our audience a little bit what the heck is mental health? Because that phrase gets thrown around all the time. And I feel like people actually don't know what it means.
Yeah. So it depends on who you're asking, because there's a modern secular definition of what mental health is. And I think even within that realm, there's a lot of disagreement on what it is, and it's kind of vague. And then there's the Thomistic, what St. Thomas would say mental health is. I'm going to read you what mental health is according to the American Psychological Association. Okay. It is a state of mind characterized by emotional well being, good behavioral adjustment, relative freedom from anxiety and disabling symptoms, and a capacity to establish constructive relationships and cope with ordinary demands and stresses of life. So it doesn't necessarily tell you what is mental health. It kind of describes what it could look like if you are, I guess, mentally healthy. Um, St. Thomas has a different definition. I'll kind of summarize it. Basically, what he says is mental health is when your faculties, designed by God Himself, are operating the way they were designed. It's kind of like when the car is operating the way the manufacturer wanted it to operate, you got a healthy vehicle, right? That's pretty much what mental health is. And he specifies that pretty much your intellect is the key faculty. When your intellect, which is able to understand truth, can understand it, can judge truth as it is, and reason through properly without any infringement, impediment, you name it, that is a mentally healthy person. That's
Yeah.
mental health.
Yeah. It's kind of like the first definition sounds like, what does it mean to be healthy? It means you don't have any diseases, right? But then you
Yeah,
compare somebody who's a professional athlete with just your average 30-year-old man who doesn't have any diseases. It's clear that one is healthier than the other, right? It's
right,
like health is a positive something. Mental health is a
right,
positive something. It means something. It doesn't mean that you lack something. It means that you have
right,
something, right?
right. No, exactly. I think it's easy to say, hey, when someone is struggling with X, Y, and Z, or they're not struggling with X, Y, and Z, then that is a mentally healthy person, right? That still doesn't necessarily tell me what is mental health, right? And I think that's the missing piece because they don't truly understand what is the human person to begin with. So we're kind of just rolling with it, coming up with like a guesstimate of what it is to be sort of healthy, right? But they really miss the mark.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think whenever you're dealing with mental health, it's important to know what it means exactly. Because fundamentally, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think what mental health is fundamentally is it's the mind's capacity to conform to reality, right? And
Yes.
somebody who is not delusional and knows that men are men and women are women, like it's just their mind conforming to reality. It's
Hmm.
just the mind
Hmm.
receiving truth and judging rightly. Whereas somebody who's mentally ill looks at reality and then because of something going on, there's multiple causes probably, but they refuse to conform mind to reality. Right? Is that
Hmm.
about right? Is that what you'd say about mental health, or is there something
That's
else?
that's exactly right. Yeah, it's basically there is a reality, there is a truth out there, and there is also a person that is truth itself, right? We can either conform to it or we can reject it or try to make it whatever it is we want it to be, right? If we conform to it, you're mentally healthy. If you reject it or make it what you want it to be, that's not in conformity to reality, that is mental illness, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So whenever you're working with people, what are some of the common problems that you see people running into over and over again? Or is there a common theme or not so much?
Um, I think there are definitely themes. I work with so many different types of people, different temperaments, and background, so there is some nuance, but I think um, one way you can describe it is what the general struggles are. So anxiety, low self-esteem, procrastination, lack of discipline. Obviously, lust is a huge one. But I think those, although they're incredibly important, there's something deeper underneath that they struggle with that I'm starting to pick up on. And it's actually they don't have custody of the mind.
Mm,
And I think there's a product that is a product of, well, I think just in general we struggle with that, but even now, right, we're so inundated with stimuli and distractions, right? Yep, that thing right there. There it is, right? And so what I'm noticing is that when I'm talking to my clients, right, whether they're again self-esteem or procrastination or lust or anxiety, you name it. What is the thing that underlies all that? They don't know how to direct their mind towards what is
mm,
good, towards what is true. Their mind goes everywhere. And it seems subtle almost, right? Because I could be at the dinner table with my family and right, my daughter could be talking about, her soccer practice, and my mind wanders to this conversation that I'm going to have today and what I want to do and hey, what am I going to talk about? And then I talk like this weekend, I'm super excited. It's the Final Four. It's going to be awesome, right? And then what happens? I'm not present,
yeah.
right? And my emotions follow what my imagination is filled with, right? So you just pick whatever it is your imagination is filled with, whether it's the future thing that you're not sure about, whether it's that girl you saw at the gym, you name it, that becomes then the beginnings of what we see and what a lot of people talk about. It's lust, it's depression, it's anxiety, whatever. But what I'm noticing is there's something deeper that actually speaks to all of those issues. And
Yeah.
one of those major things it's the lack of custody of the mind.
That's a really good observation. Yeah, I think the way that St. Thomas kind of conceptualizes this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like for St. Thomas, the intellect is the foundation of the entire moral and spiritual life, right? You can't love, you can't use your will, you can't will something that you don't have some concept of in your intellect. So you start with the
Mm-hmm,
intellect, you have to know the right stuff, right? This is why St.
mm-hmm,
Paul makes a big emphasis on you have to have the faith, right? You have to know
mm-hmm,
what you're supposed to believe in order to be saved. So
mm-hmm.
you have your intellect, and then your intellect's job is to inform your will. And you can break this down for us here in a little bit. Maybe I'd love to hear
Yeah.
what you have to say about some of this. But your intellect informs your will. So
Mm-hmm,
because you know certain things, you will certain things in a certain way, right? This is why the
mm-hmm,
information that people have, if it's bad, they turn out to make bad decisions. If it's good, they at least have a chance. I'm not saying they do, but they at least have a chance to make good decisions.
right,
So the
right.
fundamental thing that you have to get right is your intellect. Your intellect informs your will and helps you to determine what's good and what's evil. And then downstream from that are, I think the word you used was faculties, right? So like your
Mm-hmm,
emotions and all these
mm-hmm.
other things that we got going on a day-to-day basis. But it goes this
Yep.
downstream pathway from intellect to will and then will to emotions. But it's got to start with that custody of the mind, like you're talking about. It's got to start with a
Mm-hmm,
well-formed and well-trained intellect. Everything else is downstream from that.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So the appetites, like the will and your emotions, those are considered appetites. St. Thomas just basically says your will is an intellective or intellectual appetite. And then you have your emotions, right? We won't get into the language because I wish St. Thomas used easier words, but
That's what we're
those are
for,
the
right? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So he basically you have your appetites, what you desire, right? Your will desires the good, right? And then your lower appetites desire what you think is good, the perceived good, right? That is a particular thing, that food, that car, that job, whatever it is, right? What St. Thomas says is the appetites are actually blind faculties. So they cannot move unless they're informed by something, right? Your lower faculties are informed by your senses, what you experience in the world, right? You can see something and be moved. You can feel something experientially, right? I want that steak that I see, the person eating next to me in the booth at the restaurant, right? Or I can have an aversion to something I think is evil for whatever reason, right? So it's a blind faculty. They don't move unless they're given something. And just to your point too, the will, which is also a blind faculty, can't move unless the intellect, assuming, hoping it's properly formed, gives the will the true good to then go and carry out to pursue or receive, right? And so, yeah, it is absolutely crucial that if we want to achieve mental health, and I think of that as like holiness, right? We want to be like Christ.
Yeah.
We need to understand what's going on within our nature so that we can kind of move them and work to correct them in the way that God designed them.
Yeah, Christ was so mentally healthy that he's the divine physician, right? It's
Yes,
like, he's not just
exactly.
mentally healthy, he's the guy that's fixing all of us who are messed up, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
great.
So
I love
talk
that.
talk to me here a second here. Do you find that the problem for a lot of guys is a sort of lack of intellectual formation? I know that you're talking about custody of the mind, which is similar to related to intellectual formation, but not the exact same. You feel like a lot of guys just don't know how to be mentally healthy. Like they would do it. They're good people. They're trying to do the right thing, but they just have no idea where to start. Is that kind of what
Mhm.
you're experiencing, or is it something else?
I think that is a big piece of it because men don't know, and men and women, right? But I work mainly with men. They don't know themselves. And I
Yeah.
think when I say know themselves, there's two parts to that. Their nature, generally as a human person, but also their particular nature. We have different temperaments and tendencies, inclinations, right? Most men come to me and they have zero clue. All they know is, I'm not following through with this. I keep yelling at my kids. I said I was going to do that thing and I'm not. I keep falling into that sin and I told myself the last time was going to be the last time, right? That's what they come to me with. And then what I do is it is that intellectual formation, right? Custody of the mind comes later. You need to know yourself, right? And the example I give is if you are coming to me as your personal trainer, I would imagine I'm not a personal trainer, but I would imagine the person I'm working with, I would like to know their anatomy, their structure, their previous injuries. I would like to know me personally as the fitness coach. I probably should know like the basic structure of a human person and how the muscles work together, right? So that I take what I know about human anatomy and then I understand this person's particular anatomy. And then I say, here's a plan for you, and then you're going to build these skills, right? Day in and day out, week by week to achieve a certain goal. That is absolutely absent in modern psychology,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I feel like Thomistic psychology does what modern psychology is supposed to do. Like
Exactly.
it actually gets results and it gives you reasons and it gives you a cause and effect analysis and you remove the cause or
Yes.
change the cause and you get a different effect, right? It's so scientific
Right.
and intellectually pleasing. And as far as the temperaments thing goes, we can maybe do a whole like hour-long
Yeah,
show
that
on
would
the
be fun.
temperaments thing. But just for me
Yeah.
personally, my temperament is I am super phlegmatic. I have had to actually work really hard to be less passive, but my natural disposition is to just kind of be chill and go with the flow. I have to work really hard not to be like that. So that's one of the reasons for me I really prioritize going to the gym and lifting heavy weights and doing things that are going to be really challenging and demanding on my body. It's because I know that my body kind of tends in the opposite direction, tends towards
Yes.
stagnation or towards inactivity. And so forcing
Right.
my body in the other direction and being incredibly active, working up a sweat, getting a pump, all that fun stuff, right? It's
Yeah.
good for me physically and mentally. And I know that's good for me physically because I know my temperament, right? Whereas I have another
Right.
friend who is very choleric, like so choleric that his doctor, who's going through his hormones and his neurotransmitters and all that, his doctor actually recommended he take a break from the gym for a while because he's just got these
Oh,
rage
wow.
hormones all the time, right? And
Yeah.
so it's good to know where you are so that you can try to assess yourself and actually have a plan that's going to work with you and not against you, work for you and not in spite of you.
Right. You're shooting in the dark, right? And
Yeah.
that's the thing is like, in order for us to reach a level of self mastery, it begins with self knowledge, right? And I think the cool thing too, to your point, Cameron, is what you said about, knowing your own disposition and how you're going to the gym. I think the cool thing, and most people miss this part, it is this: you actually can go to the gym and do the hard thing. You are capable of doing it. It's just uncomfortable. It's just going against your nature, but you can do it. And I think that is so liberating for people when they truly understand that, right? When I break it down, hey, Here are your tendencies, your inclinations. Now, they were influenced by your parents. They were influenced by your own nature, your environment, your family of origin, you name it. Here's you right now. When push comes to shove, this is what you do. Here's the amazing thing. You can change them. Every day is an opportunity to go against your nature and towards virtue. And what you'll find is your nature starts to transform based off of the actions you choose to make every day. And there's power there. That's what actual mental health training is, what the role of a counselor and what I do in high performance coaching actually is. It's shaping you day by day towards the person God is calling you to be. But if you don't know that, if you don't know that you can do that and you don't know yourself, it can seem like, what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah. That's very, very well said. Yeah. I think that for a lot of maybe modern psychology, I'm sure there's good psychologists out there. I'm painting with a broad brush here, admittedly.
Right.
But I feel like a lot of the time it's kind of lending people to a victim mentality. Like, these things happened to you, so this is the way that you are. And now we have to make you feel okay with that. Whereas Thomistic psychology or counseling or coaching or whatever you want to call it, it's the idea that, yeah, these things happened to you and they shaped you and they might have shaped you poorly. So now you have bad habits, you have bad dispositions, you have some aversion to a good thing and an inclination towards a bad thing. But we can fix it. And here's how, step by step by step, and we can measure it to a certain degree and you can see the progress, right? So I really, really like that. I would say too, Jocko Willink has a book called Extreme Ownership. I don't know if you've read it, but it's basically the idea that the victim mentality, the idea that you're not responsible, things happen to you, leads to total disempowerment. And his book, the entire thesis is do the opposite, right? He says, take ownership, extreme ownership, take responsibility for everything that goes wrong that you possibly can in any way that's reasonable at all. Right. If something goes wrong with, let's say, your wife doesn't get the dishes done or something like that, or doesn't do something that you needed done in order for your day to flow smoothly. Well, I should have communicated that better. That was my fault that I didn't emphasize how important that task was to our day. Right. So you start by just taking ownership for everything that you possibly can, because the powerful thing is, if it's your fault, if you're the problem, you can change things and become the solution. And I love that. I love that about what you're doing.
Well, it's like you have a say in the matter, right? Because if all I do, I say, here's everybody else who's not doing what I want them to do, you have no say at that point.
No.
All you do is you hope and pray that someone has an epiphany that the deepest desires of your heart are unmet. And they wake up one day and they're like, oh, I haven't met his desires. What was I thinking? That's just not how it works, because they're thinking about their own desires, right? And they're hoping that you meet them, right? We're missing what the role of the will is, right? When you actually say no, you're right. I think that's a great example because it's so like everyday practical, right? I was expecting that my wife just had some sort of wherewithal or really prioritized it just as much as I did, right? To be able to say, like, you know what? We should probably do the dishes right now. But I never communicated, to your point, that, hey, let's make sure we get the dishes done so you and I have some time to chat and connect before bed, right? It would probably get done more often than not, right? But what do? I have too many things on my plate, right? I'm too busy reacting to everything that's going on in my own life. And I'm hoping that she will just kind of figure it out so I don't really have to step out and do anything. And then I walk out and have an expectation already built. And I go, and what I see is a missed expectation, right? And the emotion follows that sensual experience right away. And it's usually towards anger more often than not.
Yeah. Yeah. That's well said. Yeah. I want to revisit, before we get too far down the road, I want to revisit the idea of custody of the mind, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think that people hear that and they're like, yeah, that's me. I can't control what I'm thinking about. I'm constantly distracted. I've got brain rot from watching too much TikTok, right? Whatever it is.
Exactly.
So what are some, I mean, I think the most obvious would be delete social media, at least for a while. At least delete the short form content for a while, right? Maybe I'll make this clip specifically into a short for the sake of irony, but
yes.
But what would be some practical steps? Somebody comes up to you and says, "Man, I'm just really struggling. I can't control my thoughts. I don't have custody." What would you tell that person to do?
Right. I think the first thing I want to make sure people, the audience understands is custody of the mind, strictly speaking, I think, is the control not of, it's not the intellect. It's actually the control of your imagination,
Can you
right?
distinguish what that means exactly? Because some
Yep,
people I don't
yep.
think know what that
Yeah,
means.
yeah. So your intellect is it's the, I call it like the CEO of our nature. So your intellect is able to understand ideas, concepts, right? Like what is a table, right? Tableness is an idea, it's a concept. Your intellect can understand that, right? But if I actually look at my dining room table and then I walk away, I can imagine that particular dining room table. Right? I can also imagine another table that looks like that one. If I really wanted to, I can come up with a broken table, a black table, you name it. I can put that in my imagination right now. That is often based off of our sensual experiences and our memory. Right? So we can kind of create things, images in our head. That's really what dreams are. It's just some random stretch of all our images in our memory bank and what's capable to us via our imagination. So our imagination, I was talking to Father Ripperger about this, and he said that the imagination is, think of it like a TV. All it does is broadcasts
Mm,
what is an essential experience. It broadcasts what is a previous memory or a mixture of the two. All it does is broadcast the image, right? It doesn't do anything in and of itself except display the image, right? It's our job through our intellect and our will to guide it in conformity with what is true and what is good, right?
right.
So taking control over what channel the TV is on and if it even should be on is
Yeah.
extremely important for the person. So I want to make sure people understand that piece. Your imagination is the TV, right? The channels that come on automatically by what you're seeing in your world or what memories you've experienced or how you've associated things in your past, that is within your control, but most people don't recognize that. So their TV is going rampant,
Yeah.
going through channel by channel. It's incredibly loud. It's displaying that thing they don't want to be displaying, and then it becomes a mess internally, right? So that's one thing I want people to understand before they would even come to me and say, "What can I do about it?" You need to understand what's actually going on, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Before I keep
Yeah,
going.
yeah. No, and yeah, it's important. So, yeah, your intellect deals with universals, your memory
Mm-hmm,
and imagination deals with singulars. And with the
mm-hmm.
memory and imagination thing, this is useful sometimes I think, but dogs can dream, right? Dogs have a memory and an imagination. If you ever seen,
Yes.
a dog like running in its sleep, it's because they're
Yeah.
imagining, they're dreaming. They have memories of beautiful green fields that they ran through, and now their imagination is conjuring those images in their mind, right? So
Yeah.
your intellect is not your memory and your imagination, right? Your memory and your imagination are in your brain. It's a physical
Right.
phenomenon that happens that's common to us, cats, dogs, monkeys, right? Your intellect
Mm-hmm,
is something that's above that and beyond that. But in the same way that you can train a dog, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but in the same way, or at least a similar way that you can train a dog to have certain responses to certain stimuli, like a dog, the Pavlov's dogs, the famous one, right?
mm-hmm,
They ring the bell,
mm-hmm.
the dogs start to drool because they ring the bell every time they feed them. And so they associate the
Mm-hmm.
bell with food. You can do a similar thing
Right.
with your body, with your memory, with your imagination. You can change
Mm-hmm,
the emotional response that you have to this or that stimuli. So I think it's really
mm-hmm.
important to have a good understanding of the distinction between the intellect and the memory and the imagination before you move forward, because people kind of muddle those two together and think we're not much different
Exactly.
than monkeys.
Exactly, exactly. So I think that was incredibly well said. I won't add too much on that. But the if someone comes up to me and they're saying, Keone, I this whole custody of the mind thing, I don't know. I don't know how to do that. Help me. I think to your point about the phone, yes, you need to limit distractions, right? So if that is an accountability partner, if that is deleting some apps, if that is turning off your phone at certain times, yeah, you do need to limit distractions, right? The other thing is you need to proactively fill your imagination with what is good and true and beautiful. So what I tell people is, tell me what your phone even looks like. Tell me what's around your room and around your house. If it's not filled with what is true, good, and beautiful, well, something will replace that in your imagination. And if you have all those memories, all those images and experiences and sensual data day by day through going to the store, going to the gym, you name it, that will gladly fill your imagination. right? So we can actively fill our imagination with things that are good and true, right? Custody of the mind means take control of the mind. So take control and fill it with good things, right? So that is another thing that I often tell them. The third, most people don't know, I credit Father Ripper on this one because he heavily emphasizes Our Lady of Sorrows, asking her specifically to heal your imagination and your memory. Because what happens is you have memories that are ingrained in you. And when something that occurs in your experience in the here and now is associated in any way with a memory, let's just say a lustful memory, boom, it's going to go onto that TV screen right away, right? So we also want to ask for the grace and the assistance of Our Lady to purify the imagination and the memory, because we don't have to do it alone. This is why we have our faith, which is beautiful, right? Now, I'll give one more practical tool. This is something I give all my clients that go through the virtue building program. It's what I call the 4 R's. So how I teach this is when, let's just say, here's an easy example. I'm driving in the car. I'm on my way somewhere, and someone cuts me off. Okay, and I have this thought of like, "Are you kidding me? Right, I'm about to go down this route. Right? We all know this, right? Are you serious? What are you doing? You should have, right? Whatever." The first R is to reject it. I'm not going to do that. Or Keone, stop. Or you're doing it again. Whatever that is. What I'm doing there in the act of rejection, the first R, is I'm engaging the will. Depending on the situation, the will can be extremely weak. That's why you have a lack of custody of the mind, right? So what I'm doing is from the very beginning, you need to strengthen the will. You need to engage it by saying no. Now, to be fair, it probably won't work because your passions are too loud. St. Thomas says we have one soul, so you can only really pursue one thing. You can go in one direction. So basically, how I like to think of it is if all your faculties are sitting around a boardroom meeting, right, the loudest voice in the room wins, right? And oftentimes our emotions are the loudest voice in the room. So in that moment, if that person cutting you off or they didn't put their blinker on to your liking, whatever the case is, if that ignites an anger response, you just saying stop or Keone, don't go there is insufficient, but it's necessary because I'm engaging the will. I need to strengthen the will. So that's the first R, is to reject, right? Because the path you're going is sinful. It is not virtuous. The second step, second R, is redirect. This is where a lot of mental health gets it sort of right, right? They often call it grounding, or they use the term mindfulness. I'm not in love with the term mindfulness. I usually use the word grounding. Really what they're doing, and this is Thomistic too, they're engaging your senses, right? So they'll say, turn up the music, look a different direction, maybe look at the restaurant nearby, maybe look at the trees, right? Maybe you intentionally feel the texture of your steering wheel. You're engaging your 5 senses. And the reason, I don't think they actually understand this Thomistically, but the reason why grounding works is it gives your imagination new data to fill itself with. It's a different channel on your TV, because what your imagination was thinking is that person's wrongdoing and what you wished you could have done to them, right? Or hope will happen to them. That's what your imagination is at right now. So when you redirect it towards things like your senses, because your senses are literally receiving things and stimuli in the here and now, when you engage them strategically and intentionally, it can quiet the effect of that experience that happened moments ago, right? So that's the redirect phase. And it basically, what it does, I say, is it turns off your alarm system, right? It quiets that emotion. It turns down the dial, the volume of that emotion. That's a necessary step. For some people, that takes 10 seconds, just kind of an easy redirect. My bad, kind of slipped out. Sometimes it takes 15, 20 minutes. You got into that argument with your wife and you're pretty ticked off because this is the 15th time you told her and you thought she would change, right? You might need a 20-minute redirect. Go for a walk, listen to music, call up a friend, read a book, whatever you need to do to not think about that situation. It is not the time because you are flooded, right? Your emotions are too high. So the second R is redirect. You need to turn off those emotions, turn off the alarm system. Then and only then can you get into the last two R's, step 3 and step 4. Step 3, the third R, is to reframe. Now you can engage the intellect because your lower faculties are kind of quieted, right? Your emotions are still. Then you can engage the intellect and say, what is true here? How can I reframe this situation in light of Christ, right? Or in light of some truth, right? Maybe it's the understanding that this person probably has no idea who I am. It wasn't some personal attack on like my, my well-being or my identity. They didn't go out of their way and wake up and say, hey, how can I really ruin Keone's trip to the doctor's office? He doesn't really care. And so my job in that moment is to see the kind of the universal truth here, that it's not some personal attack. And also, if we want to, we can do this all day long, right? You can reframe it in saying the Lord is asking me and inviting me to be patient. Because the last couple of days, I've been a little irritable with my family. I kind of needed this to slow down, to quiet myself. That's a reframe. You're introducing a truth, a greater good, a new perspective in light of our faith, in light of Christ, in light of virtue, that actually gives us something else to imagine, right? So that's the reframe. But it doesn't end there either. There's step 4. The last R is to resolve. What are you going to now do? This is now re-engaging the will to follow the idea presented by the intellect. So if I knew without a doubt that this person didn't really do it personally, wasn't like against me, and I knew that the Lord has been inviting me to be patient, and there's a good there, what will I do in this moment moving forward? I'll probably roll the window up, turn up the volume, and continue on. Take a deep breath. That's my resolve. That is the virtuous action that will carry out the truth I came to. That this is an invitation from God to practice patience, that it's probably not some personal attack. This person has no idea who I am, probably doesn't even care, right? That's the truth, but the truth needs to inform action. If it doesn't inform action, it won't stick, right? Because St. Thomas says true healing resides in the will. So that's why step 4 is so necessary. I know a lot of people tell me, well, I came up with this reframe. I just started to think about it differently. It's insufficient. You need to act that new thought out. That's what leads to a true transformation. So for someone who's wanting to grow in custody of the mind, whenever you're moved negatively, if it's anger, if it's sadness, if it's self-criticism, if it's lust, this could be a very useful 4-step process to get you out of that old habit and pattern of thinking and start to build a more virtuous response moving forward.
So it's reject, and then it's reframe. Is that number 2?
Reject, redirect.
Reject, redirect, reframe, and then resolve. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's super useful. I think that, just to maybe tie that together and put a bow on it, is the way that I think about it is that at every single moment, God is sending you what he thinks is best for your sanctification. And sometimes what's best for your sanctification is for people to annoy you. Right? It's like St. John of the Cross was spiritually directing a woman once, and she wrote to him and said, St. John, I would be so holy if my sisters in the chapel would stop picking their fingernails and would stop, pounding their foot on the floor and making all these little noises and stop breathing so heavily. Oh my gosh, John, it's so annoying. I would be so holy. I'd be able to pray so well if these people weren't so annoying, right? We've all been there. We know what that's like. And then St. John writes back and says, sister, you're missing the entire point. Those little nuisances are the way that God is sanctifying you and calling you to grow in patience, right? So I would even say maybe, and you can say what you want about this, but the resolve, I think oftentimes for those nuisances, if you want to do it really well, could be saying a prayer of thanksgiving. Like, thank you, God, for this opportunity to grow in patience. Thank you for getting me this far in the 3 R's. Thank you for getting me through step number 3. My 4th one here is going to be, thank you for sending that person to annoy me so that
Yep.
I can grow in patience. You look at
Hmm.
David in, I think it's 2 Samuel chapter 3. Don't quote me on that. But he is being kicked out and somebody's throwing rocks at him and cursing David. And David says, perhaps the Lord has commissioned this person to curse David, right? He recognizes that God is working through even the people who are cursing him and throwing rocks at him, right? So yeah,
Hmm.
I think that that's awesome.
There's a principle, and that is this: if the Lord allowed it, it must have salvific potential. Our
Mm,
job is to either respond to it or reject it.
yeah. Amen. Amen. Yeah, I think it's Reverend Garrigou Lagrange, who's a Thomist from the 20th century, but he basically makes the point in one of his spiritual writings that at every moment, God is giving us more grace than we're even capable of handling. We just have to be aware
Yeah.
of that and open up our hearts and our minds to be able to receive that. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a crazy concept.
Isn't it? Isn't it nuts? God
Yeah.
is so good, man. God is so good. So good.
Yeah.
So whenever you're dealing with this, can you say a little bit about this too? Because I see this a lot whenever I'm working with people, is they get the idea that, let's say they're trying to build up a habit of fasting or something like that. And they think, oh, I'm going to be miserable forever. I don't have the habit of temperance right now. I'm used to overeating. And so the idea of not eating is miserable to me. And I'm always going to be miserable. And I can't learn to fast and eat temperately because this is how I become happy. Can you say a little bit too about how habits become pleasant, right? Once you've
Hmm.
developed them, there's a sort of wall that you have to get over. But then once you have the habit of temperance, you actually enjoy eating the right amount or
Yeah.
even fasting.
Right, right, right. I think St. Thomas says that it was either St. Thomas or maybe it was even going back to Aristotle, that virtue becomes pleasurable in and of itself because it's you're acting in conformity to your nature, right? So there's a joy that comes in that, right? Because it's kind of like a seamless process. That was really easy, right? It wasn't like grueling and difficult and arduous, right? So as you grow in virtue, it actually becomes easier. To that person who's saying, I can't possibly do that, I would want to know, again, there's an association there. That association they have, right, was probably moved by an image. They think about, so the way I think about it, let me back up a little bit. We say, hey, you should probably start to fast because you need to grow in XYZ. You're having struggle with lust. One of the best ways to overcome lust is through fasting and meditation, right? So, and then they're like, Keone, I could not possibly fast. What's happening in that moment? The minute I said fast, that person hears that word right through their ears, and then they go into their memory and they think about, right, maybe a previous experience that they have with fasting. Maybe they tried it, or maybe it's just a previous experiences during Lent, right, where they really tried to go for it and they face planted, right? Like, there's no way I can do this. Or maybe they witnessed their parents do it, like, they didn't eat for 3 days, and maybe that person saw their parents really struggle or suffer, or maybe the parents were so irritable because they were fasting so much that they lashed out at the kid, right? So they're like, there's no way I'm doing this, Keone, because they have certain experiences and beliefs, associations, just by the word fasting, that are probably erroneous or at best disproportionate. And so I think it's important for them to understand that. So before I even say, well, hey, have you thought about blah, 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 I'm not even going to give suggestions yet. I'm going to say, tell me why. And what I'm looking for is, what are your associations? Where is this coming from? Because that you have some understanding, going back to what mental health is, of what fasting looks like and what's going to happen. You've already predicted it before you even tried it. Tell me why. And once I understand that information, then I can say, well, is that true? Or is there any way that could happen differently this time? What if we approached it in this manner, right? All of that can be established after we start to understand what's going on here, what's happening underneath. Because it's not random that you just decided to say that, hey, Kim, there's no way I can fast, right? It's going to be terrible. Right? You came up with that based off of some pattern within you. Understand the pattern so that you can disrupt it and purify it. All right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I feel like whatever you believe about yourself is usually true. Now, don't take that too far, right? Obviously, there are narcissists and things like that. But
Yeah.
people who have a past of being good at something, there's lots of evidence that they can do it, and they have confidence in themselves, and they believe they can do it, then they can, right? Like, your
Hmm.
belief and the way that you approach things is half of the battle. And what it ultimately comes
Hmm.
down to, bringing the faith back into it, is you have to have faith in God's power and his ability to do good things. That's the first step. And then you have to have faith in God's power and ability to work through even you.
Right.
Right? Even you can do great things with God's strength. And I think that
Hmm.
that's the place where a lot of people get stumbled. They're like, yeah, God is all powerful. He can do all these things, but I can't. I can't. I have this past. I have these
Yeah.
experiences like you're talking about. I don't believe that I can, because look at me, you know. And so yeah, it's really important, but I want to hear you say more. I want to hear you finish this thought.
Yeah, so let's give an example, right? So I'll give a personal example. When I moved from California to Arizona, it was a kind of a bunch
Good
of
decision, by the way.
transitions, right? Right? Best decision I ever made. Um, and
We love
so I wasn't.
Californians, though. If somebody from California is
We
watching this,
love
we
you
love you.
guys.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
But please
yeah.
move.
Just come on over to AZ. Um, so I wasn't working out at all. I was like, I want to say it got to like 2-3 months. That's the longest since maybe eighth grade that I didn't work out regularly. And it was like eating at me because, I mean, I'm a college athlete, right? I mean, I train multiple hours a day. Like, not working out for even a day or two was like, it didn't feel right, right? So here I am, I'm moving. There's so many logistics, right? We were expecting our second, and it was like, oh man. And every day it was like, you should work out, just like you should fast, but I had a belief of what working out is. In my mind, I thought about those high intensity workouts. I had those, training sessions in the gym. I had those hit workouts or whatever it is in my mind of that's what workout means. When I said, Kone, you should work out, which is a truth. Unfortunately, there was associations that were erroneous given the now. And it wasn't until I recognized that and I said, dude, you don't need to work out like you're in college. Just go do like 15 squats and 50 push-ups before bed. Just do that and you worked out. Make that what working out means to you and be okay with that. Have the humility, right, to say, this is my next most prudent step towards excellence. And I actually embraced it and I said, okay, fine. I'm going to do some squats. I'm going to knock out some push-ups. And what I found was 15 became 30, became 60, became 100, became a full 30-minute workout in my garage, became 3 to 5 times a week within a couple weeks because I allowed myself to actually do the thing and build the momentum rather than tell myself I needed to perform some sort of standard of excellence tomorrow. If that's the case, then yeah, you won't move. You can't do it, right? Because our pride kind of gets in the way, or a false belief, or an assumption of excellence, right? But when you actually embrace the process towards excellence and there's virtue in the process, not just the result, right? Then it becomes something you're willing to engage in, coupled with everything you said about our Lord working in and through us. He's there, right? Filling us with the grace we need, but grace built upon nature. We have to be willing to do the work in an incremental step, right? And that's why I emphasize so much. We keep saying the word fasting or workout, but I bet you and I have different associations and understandings of that very word. Let's not assume that we're talking the same thing, even though we're using the same word, right? Help me understand what you mean when you say that. Then I can go in there and challenge and make the corrections so that that person can make that click. The intellect sees the truth, and then the will can actually engage with that truth because it sees it as good, a graspable and doable good.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point. A lot of people think that working out means 6 hours in the gym a week, 3 2-hour sessions, and that's just unattainable for most people. So they
Mm-hmm.
despair. They despair. They say, I'll never be able to work out. Whereas the
Right.
scripture says, he who despises small things will fail little by little. And so for me, the way that I've done this with working out is I go to the gym about once every 4 days, and I do a minimal effective dose. So what my workout looks like is I'll go in incline bench press, I'll put 275 on the bar, I'll do 5 reps, then I'm done with chest for the day. right? So I'll just go all the way to failure. I might do a little drop set and then I'm done. And then I'll go and do deadlift. I'll do one set heavy deadlift, like, 400 pounds plus, go to failure, and then I'm done, right? Because for me, what I have to do is figure out a way to get as much of the results in as little time as possible because I'm busy. Like 45 minutes twice a week is hard to squeeze in for working out sometimes. So I've just
Hmm.
tried to make it as small, the simplest, lowest bar, the fewest sets, the simplest thing I can do
Right.
twice a week. And that's been huge for me, right? Because I used to,
Yeah.
like you, spend an hour and a half in the gym, good time. You would lift with some buddies, you're hanging out. And I can't do that anymore. You have to
Right.
lower the bar a little bit.
Right. Right. Which is prudence, right? It's like, what is the right way to move forward to achieve the goal, right? And if you're not acting prudently, then you're probably just basing things off of assumptions that are more often than not inaccurate or not grounded in the reality of the now, right? So that's what keeps us stuck. And so that person who wants to fast, they probably won't fast because they've never understood and challenged, right, their actual assumptions and developed the prudent steps to build the virtue of fasting, right, to be more temperate.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like, and maybe you can nuance this for us or explain how this works, but it sounds like a lot of people are kind of running through their lives on autopilot. They assume certain things, and before they dive into those assumptions, they base their decisions based off of those assumptions. So it sounds like, yeah, a lot of what you're doing is going in, questioning those assumptions, making them engage the intellect, engage the will, and figure out that the autopilot, the system that they've been running to get through their day-to-day life, is actually insufficient. It doesn't work as well as it's
Right.
supposed to, and it's affecting your life. Is that kind of a little bit like what you would say is going on
Yeah,
here, or not so
yeah, yeah,
much?
yeah. So St. Thomas, the faculty here that's really important is what's called the cogitative power. This is what you said we have in common with animals, right? It's basically the faculty that makes associations. This is like that, or this reminds me of that, right? That's your associations, right? And what happens is the more you associate those things together, the more they become almost one thing, right? This is actually how brainwashing works. We just package things together repetitively, and then the viewer automatically sees it as one thing, and then they believe it to be true, right? That's how we operate, right? So that's the cogitative power, right? And what it does is it pretty much in modern psychology, it forms what is called a neural pathway, right? And it's funny that modern psychology has just recognized that there's a thing called neuroplasticity, that you can kind of change the neural pathways, you can break them and form new ones. And St. Thomas Aquinas said it in, how many 100 years ago,
And
right? That
Aristotle said it before that too. I mean, this is
exactly,
nothing new.
exactly. He said that you can change the habits of the cogitative power. Basically, if you have an association of something, this is bad or that is good, you can change it, right? But what most people fail to do, because going back to the distractions and the consumptions and the lack of the knowledge of the human person, we take those associations at face value and we assume they're true, and we act in accordance with them blindly without seeing them in light of truth. So then what happens is your intellect habitually buys in to that association, and then your will follows through with it. And that's why, right, your intellect becomes blinded, clouded, your will becomes weakened because you start to react to these associations that are probably erroneous. And now you've built vices, and it's slowly destroying the faculties. It's blurring your understanding of reality. It's weakening the strength of your will. So then they come to me like, what the heck is going on? Right? And we have to go down to square one. Do you even know yourself
Yeah.
first? So the structure of it, right? Here are the players, right? Here are the mechanics. Then you tell me a situation, we apply it based off of that structure. Then you see what the error is. Now you can actually work on reforming it, right?
Yeah.
Righting that wrong, making that correction so that, going back to what mental health is, your faculties are operating the way they were designed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's awesome. Because I want to clarify here too. The cogitative power does not just associate ideas with ideas. It also associates ideas with certain emotions. Is that right?
Yeah, so basically what happens is when you feel an emotion, right, your cogitative power can associate memories that go with that emotion. But what I think often happens is I experience something in my sensual world, right? So I see something. There's an image now that is impressed into my imagination. That image in my imagination, right, is almost like broadcasted so that my cogitative power sees it and says, oh, that's like this in my memory. And that could either be true or it can be false, right? I
Mhm.
could think that that lady at the local grocery store is my mom because it kind of looks like her from the back, but it's not. It was an error, right? So your cogitative power can make false associations all the time, but we never challenge them oftentimes, right? So your cogitative power, oftentimes, it pairs what you just experienced with a memory, and then your emotion is moved by that because it's blind. It's waiting to be told what to do, right? So obviously, if there's something acute that occurs in my central experience, I'm going to feel like pain, like physically, right? And I might feel the sorrow of that experience. But oftentimes what happens in a day-to-day situation is you experience something, there's an image that now is in my imagination based off of what I just experienced that is paired up with certain memories that I have, and from
Yeah.
there, your emotions come. Those emotions
Yeah.
can be radically disproportionate and erroneous, or they could be properly ordered based off of what the truth of the situation is.
It's like, I think that this is a really helpful analogy. Maybe this just popped into my head. I used to teach, right? And I'm not naming any of my former students by name or anything like that, but from teachers, you hear all the time, oh, I could never name my son Thomas. I had a student named Thomas once and he was a handful. Oh my goodness, right? It's like this Thomas and that Thomas, right? Thomas that was in your class and Thomas who you may have as a son have absolutely nothing to do with each other. But because every time you hear the word Thomas, you associate that with that person who was a troublemaker in class, now you have that negative emotion that's associated with the name Thomas. Therefore, I can't name my son Thomas, right? Is that kind of how it
Mhm.
works?
Exactly, right? Because you had those day to day experiences of that student, Thomas. And over time, what happened? You started to develop an aversion to that student. So when you hear the word, hey, you should name your son Thomas, boom, automatically your cognitive power says, ooh, Thomas, that's like that student. And then what did I feel when I was around that student? Aversion. So what do you feel in the here and now when someone says you should name your child Thomas? Immediate aversion, right? We have no idea. We're just like, oh, that's not for me. And then you move on. Now, that's a minuscule example, right? You can just choose a different name if you really wanted to. But if you wanted to challenge yourself, you could actually redirect and create a brand new association. That takes a little bit more work because your cognitive power develops habits. So there's a sense of pain in going against your nature. But going back to your example, or what I told you earlier, is the power is in the will. You can do it.
Yeah.
You are capable, right? You can start to meet good Thomases in your life. You can really reach out to that one Thomas at Mass who you really respect and have a conversation with them. Like, wow, you know what? Thomases aren't that bad, right? And then get to the point where, like, I think I'm going to name my son Thomas. You could read a devotional to St. Thomas Aquinas and be like, dude, St. Thomas is a genius. I love Thomas. You can change it. It's just difficult because you've been habituating a pattern. If you don't understand the pattern and you don't have the will or the desire to move away from it, you remain stuck by
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah. I think maybe this is an extreme example, but something on a similar vein is I've heard that whenever people get out of the occult and especially Satanism with the black masses and everything, and they convert to Catholicism, which is a miraculous act of God when that does happen. But a lot of people who are coming out of that way of living do not like the Latin Mass at all because in the black masses, they're using incense, they're using Latin, they're using all these things that are in the old Mass that aren't so much in the new Mass. And so they feel much more comfortable and at home in the new Mass. And if somebody's going through that, obviously, do what you can do.
Right,
Take the grace that God is giving you and run with it as much as possible. But that's just another example of how these associations can be used against us, and we don't even know it half the time. We don't. I
right,
mean, oh my gosh, I'm just thinking of all the in my own life. I'm certainly an imperfect man, right? But in other people's lives, you say something, and immediately they're not even willing to engage with you. They're not willing to reason with you. They're not willing to
right,
discuss it. Because, like, oh, you
right,
said this thing, and this thing for me is associated with all these bad memories. Therefore, I want nothing to do with you. And they just shut off.
right,
Right.
right,
I think that's part of the art of apologetics too, is learning how to discuss these things in a way that keeps people disarmed, keeps their
right.
shields down, keeps their defenses down. It doesn't turn into a me attacking you, you attacking me kind of thing.
Right, right. An interesting thing too, it'll probably be in another episode when you talked about the person who goes out of Satanism, right, and converts to Catholicism, is not only is it your own human natural associations, right, obviously, but the devil has access to your lower faculties, right? He can actually manipulate your imagination and your memories. He can distort them and he can poke them in a certain way, especially when you've been in, you know, high trauma, witchcraft, things of the occult, things so kind of close to home for the evil one, where he's like, oh, yep, I have kind of a grip here even on a natural realm. It doesn't even need to be extraordinary diabolical influence. It could be just kind of ordinary temptations in that he says, I know your faculties. He does not have access to our intellect or our will, but he does have access to our lower faculties. So if I know that the person habitually, right, kind of sees something a certain way, the demon can be pretty interested in that
Yeah.
and start to poke it, right? So that would be another fascinating topic. But that's another piece too. The demons understand our nature how St. Thomas understands our nature. So if we want to win the spiritual battle, you probably should start to understand yourself the way St. Thomas understands us and apply it to your life so you're more equipped to fight the spiritual battle successfully.
Yeah, I think I heard Father Ripperger say once that the demons all use Thomistic psychology. And then
Yeah.
I told that to a friend of mine once who's a good Thomist. And he said, well, the demons figured it out first. So it's more like St. Thomas is using demonic psychology. I was like, I don't like that. I like it the other way. But regardless,
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
demons are only so effective because they have a profound understanding of human nature, far better than probably even St. Thomas and this life had. They know
Right.
all of these things
Right.
intimately. They understand them far better than we can even comprehend. And that's why they're
Right.
so effective at tempting people, at manipulating people, at leading people in whatever direction they want if they're not resisted. It's because they
Right.
know this psychology that we're talking about very well. So they can manipulate the input and manipulate the output, right? It's a science. It's a
Right.
science.
Right. And you think about it, we're facing the smartest enemy, right, in all of existence. But we fight this battle as a member of the church militant without knowing our own nature. But he knows our nature. The greatest enemy on earth knows our nature. You would think strategically, if you want to have any sort of success in this battle, you should probably know your nature too. And this is what has inspired me to start to spread this because Thomistic psychology, our own nature, the faculties of the human person, is foreign to the modern Catholic ear. And
Yeah.
that is a travesty, right? This is why I think the church is in the state it's in right now, let alone the world, because one of the reasons we've forgotten who we are. And so we've been reacting to sin, and sin leads to destruction, and we're in the middle of it.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Yeah, well said. Give me goosebumps. I'm ready to go, man. No, I
Love
know
it.
I do a lot of apologetics on my channel, but honestly, my heart and soul is in Thomism, Thomistic psychology, Thomistic theology. That's the stuff that I read in my free time, right? That's what I do for fun.
Yep.
So I love
Yep.
this. But Keone, I'm gonna put a link in the description to a survey that people can fill out if they might be interested in working with you. I know you got a wait list currently, but hopefully we can can get some people who are really
Yeah.
interested in this, who are watching this and saying, this is what I need, right? We're going through and I can't imagine there's 100% people out there watching this interview all the way through who go, wow, he just named all of my problems and told me how to fix them. Right? It's
I
like
hope
even
so. God willing.
even me listening to this, you're saying stuff. I'm like, oh man, I need to be doing that better. Like that makes so much sense. There's just light bulbs going on in my head. So I'll put that
Yeah.
link in the description. People can fill that out and hopefully get a hold of you. But Kone, thank you so much for coming on. And hopefully we
Yeah.
can make this a regular occurrence. I would love to pick your brain on a ton more things. And you can give us your perspective, St. Thomas's perspective, Father Ripperger's perspective. I mean, we got everybody in this thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We got all the heavy hitters coming in. So Keone,
Seriously.
thank you so much for coming on, brother. Do you have any closing
Thank you,
thoughts?
brother. No, it was a blast. I think the more we can do this and spread this, the more the church will start to heal and be transformed because more men and women, especially men who are called to lead, know themselves, have mastered themselves to a greater degree, and thus are able to give themselves more freely for the transformation, the healing of the church, and the glory of God. Right. So if we can do that well, then, and I played a part in that, well, then thanks be to God for that. I did my job.
Amen, brother. Yeah, the final battle between heaven and Satan is over marriage and the family. Every
Exactly.
man is called to be a leader. Every man is called to fatherhood in some capacity. And so
Yeah.
that's what we're doing. That's what you're doing. I love it. All right, everybody, go click on the link in the description, fill that thing out, see if you can work with Kone, and I will talk to you guys soon. God bless.